Have you ever got a satisfying trap kill in Fortnite? You got into a build fight and you managed to box up the other player and eliminate them with a trap? I'm sure we're all familiar with this item, the damage trap. Well, what if I told you there were a lot more traps in the game than you thought? That's exactly what we're going to be looking at today as we go over every single trap item in the history of Fortnite. Moving right into it, why don't we start off with the one we all know and love, the damage trap. This trap is very simple and straightforward. It can be placed on either your builds or neutral builds, meaning a wall, ceiling, or floor of a building that's already in the game. Whenever an enemy player walked over it, spikes would shoot out and it would deal damage. Now, this trap was there from the very beginning of Battle Royale. It went through a few changes over the years, the earliest version only being able to be placed on floor surfaces, but it would deal 125 damage. In Season 2, they were updated to be placeable on walls and ceilings now. In Season 4, the trap was nerfed, only dealing 75 damage, but later that season, it was buffed to deal a beefy 150 damage. Fast forward to Chapter 5 and this trap is currently vaulted. Next up we have one that I think is really cool actually, and it's the Wall Dynamo, which was also introduced during the beginning of Battle Royale. The Wall Dynamo was some sort of electric machine that would shock an enemy player that walked near it, dealing 125 damage. Now, this trap could only be placed on walls, hence the name Wall Dynamo. Now, despite this being a really cool trap, there was one downside to it. It was pretty dang loud. Any player walking by could easily be able to hear it. However, during those really early stages of Fortnite, before Season 1, nobody really knew any better, so they would sometimes just walk straight into it, not even knowing what it was. Sadly, this item had a very short lifespan because by the time Season 1 rolled around, it was already vaulted, and we haven't seen it since. I would love to see this one back though. Moving along, we have a very similar trap, and it's called the Ceiling Zapper. As you can tell by the name, it was a trap that was placed on the ceiling, and it would zap people who walked under it. Seriously though, there's not much to say about this one considering it's basically just a wall dynamo that's meant for the ceiling. It was also vaulted when Season 1 came around and we haven't seen it since. I think this one's really cool, but yeah, it's basically just the wall dynamo for the ceiling. Next up, fast forward to Season 8, we have the Poison Dart Trap. Now what this trap does is when a player walks in front of it, it would shoot out poison darts, which would deal 80 damage over time to the player. This damage would of course come directly from your health bar, completely ignoring your shields because, well, it's poison. This trap only stayed for one season as it was vaulted in Season 9, but they would actually return in the Chapter 3 location Shuffled Shrines. However, the item itself was still vaulted and remains vaulted to this day. Now we have the first one from Chapter 2, and in Chapter 2 Season 4 that brought us the Fire Trap, which is exactly what you think it is. Seriously though, when the trap was placed, if an enemy walked over it, as you would guess, it would activate and start a fire pretty much. This trap would only deal an initial 50 damage, however, as it is fire, if the player stayed in it, then it would continue to do 10 damage per second over time. Also, when placed on wooden structures, the fire can spread and destroy the builds. Sadly, this trap was only in the game for one season, as it was vaulted in Chapter 2, Season 5. I'd really like to see this one come back though, I think it was pretty cool. Now, the traps that we just went over are actual traps, meant to deal damage and eliminate other players. However, there are more items that aren't traps, but are technically classified as traps, meaning they are in the trap category. So let's take a look at those. Firstly, coming from Season 6, we have Chillers. Now this trap is pretty simple. Once placed, if a player walks over it, then it would give them frozen feet, causing the player to kinda slide all over the place, making it harder to move until the ice breaks off. With this, you could do things like quickly slide down slopes to reach your destination really fast, but it would also be very hard to build considering you would just kind of slide right off your ramps. This trap does no damage and it can be used by both teammates and enemy players, but it did end up being vaulted the very next season in Season 7. Next up, introduced in Season 1 of Battle Royale, we have the directional jump pad, and the name is very straightforward. This could be placed on floors and it would simply launch you in the direction you were facing when you walked over it. However, there was another variation to this item which was blue, and it actually launched you vertically up into the air. And oddly enough, these only took up 1/4 of a tile. Not sure why that is, but yeah. Sadly though, they ended up being vaulted that same season, never to be seen again. It would be cool to see these come back someday though. Next up, also coming from Season 1, we have the launch pad, not to be confused with the jump pad. We all know this one though. The launch pad is a very simple one. It can be placed on floors and it will launch you high into the air, allowing you to deploy your glider and gain a ton of distance. The launch pad has been vaulted and unvaulted time and time again over the years, and in Chapter 2 they were actually updated to be environmental, meaning they're naturally placed at some locations around the map ready to be used. And with the last movement trap, we have bouncers. These appeared in Season 4 and were vaulted and unvaulted many times until most recently they were vaulted in Chapter 3 and they've stayed there since. Bouncers could be placed on walls, floors, and this time even slopes, so you could place them on your stairs that you build. Once touched, they would simply bounce you in the opposite direction, giving you a low gravity effect and negating fall damage. So if you were at a high up spot and wanted to get down, you could just place one of these and bounce down. Also, if you ever tried to do the thing where you make a box and put 2 bouncers in it, to where the player that goes in just bounces back and forth, one of the bouncers would actually break on its own so that the player wouldn't be stuck there and they could actually get out. Next up, we have kind of a weird one, I guess, but it's actually a useful one, and that's the armored wall. Introduced in Chapter 2 Season 8 and eventually vaulted in Chapter 3 Season 4. The armored wall was, well, just that, a wall with armor. You could place it on your builds to give them armor, and these walls had 2,500 health, which came really in handy whenever you just had to box up to protect yourself so that you can maybe heal up during a fight or something. Alright, now even though those last few items weren't technically traps, they still kind of made some sense, right? A little bit at least. Oh, they didn't make sense? Okay, well anyways, moving on, we actually have 2 items that you would have never guessed would be on this list. The first of those 2, we have the Cozy Campfire, and this item is very simple. You could place it on floors and stand on the tile that it was placed on, and it would heal you over time for up to 50 HP. These 2 would eventually become environmental, just like the launch pads, and in later updates they would actually burn you if you stood directly over the flame. Also, you would be able to place stairs on top of it so you could kind of peek over your walls and it would still heal you through those stairs. Alright, and last but not least, you will have never guessed this one, but we have the mounted turret. The mounted turret was introduced in Season 6 and it was eventually vaulted in Season 10 or Season X as some will call it. And it was quite literally just that. It was a turret that you could sit on and use to damage and eliminate other players. It could do a full 360 degree turn, and it dealt a nice 40 damage per shot. This was a pretty cool addition to Fortnite in my opinion. A lot of people didn't like these, but I think it was pretty cool. So there we have it. Every trap item that has ever been in Fortnite. A couple of these actually surprised me because I did not know that they were considered a trap. Anyways, if you stayed to the end of this video, I really appreciate it and I hope you enjoyed it. If you don't mind, maybe leave a like, maybe hit that subscribe button for more content like this. Comment down below what type of video you would like me to do next.